Great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michael. Thank you, Ken, so much for that amazing introduction. Sound check, I'm good? Great. My name is Michael Leando. Partner in crime is with Ashish. You just saw me giving the live interaction demo as they all go. Not quite where we wanted to be, but hey, we had fun while we're doing it. This is one of those presentations where I do love to take those risks, though, and have demos that are interactive. So if you see the QR code here, go ahead and pull out your phone. Doesn't bother me. We're gonna have some fun. That's really what we're all about. Talk today is called I Literally Just Showed You. It's gonna be talking about what we just learned going through that presentation, through that demo, and the interactivity that we just went through. Yeah, emojis are gonna be all through the slides. Couple things, as Ken pointed out, I have my kids back home. We're gonna go 12, 10, and 5 on those. So any Pixar movie out there, I've seen it many times, as a lot of you parents in the crowd are familiar with. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, parents in the crowd, yeah, I know, right, we left the kids. We're gonna be talking about all of these amazing AWS services, okay? And there's a lot. Things that in the past have been particularly hard to do, now, not so much. When it comes to building out full stack applications with Amazon, we're gonna see where we are today. Because in case you haven't noticed, at a React Native conference, AWS isn't really where our focus is. We have dedicated teams for that. But maybe it's changed a little bit, where we need to reevaluate. There is always a hacker every single time. Every single time. Validate your inputs. The crazy thing is, it happens every talk. I don't know how to stop. Like, I know how to stop it, but it's like, when it's happening, I don't know how to stop it. Can you stop, please? A little bit about me. My name is, as I said, Michael Leando. You know that I'm a self-taught developer, avid foodie. If you know any taco places, let me know, because those are my things. But let's do it this way, okay? Unless you're still trying to mess with me. We're gonna do tacos if you're a self-taught developer. We're gonna do otters if you went to boot camp or university. I just wanna see, and maybe we can learn something about where everybody is at. I've seen more tacos than otters right now. It's kind of cool. I like tacos, it's in there. But with that, I don't want to hog the mic for too long, so I'm gonna let Ashish go ahead and give us a little bit of background about himself.
Yeah, hey folks, I'm Ashish. So I'm a tech lead in SDM at AWS. I work on the open source libraries for web and cross-platform development, so that includes JavaScript, all the web frameworks, React Native, and Flutter. So I'm one of those rare folks over here who's kind of uniquely qualified to give an unbiased opinion, because we want both sets of developers to have a good time, so don't hate me for it.
Cool, so we're gonna go through a couple of things today. First and foremost, like, how the heck did we build what we just built? And how does that get incorporated into these live emojis that you're seeing here? We're gonna be talking about the services that we use to make that happen. Overview of AWS, of course, because we are fans of React Native. I actually have a strong background at a mobile consultancy. And yeah, we're talking about AWS Amplify. What is that, and how does that help expedite our tool chain when it comes to building out applications? In terms of a demo, we'll see where we're at with that as we get along here. So in case you didn't scan the QR code the first time, go ahead and pull it out. I see some of you kind of fiddling with your phones now. Feel free to take part. But this is what a modern application looks like today when you're building on AWS. Now, if you're not familiar with these services, it can look pretty scary. Okay? We have Lambda functions, and as front-end developers, it's kind of cool that now we more or less know what a Lambda function is, a cloud function, a serverless function. They all run underneath that same name. Other services, we have AppSync. That is the service that is near and dear to my heart. That is a team that I work on at AWS. We'll talk about that later on. In case you want a database, we have NoSQL options, SQL options. We're AWS, right? We have a bunch of services. So feel free to go ahead and pick. Oftentimes what I see in this showcase, we're building out a SaaS application from this architecture diagram. So DynamoDB is typically the database of choice. S3s, a lot of us are familiar with that in case you want to store images, videos, other media assets, and then you can put in CloudFront in front of there. A lot of jargon, a lot of words get thrown out. We're going to try and break it down so that it's not so difficult for those that are unfamiliar. Now, I want to be real, okay? I work at AWS. I started off as a front-end developer, was a UX engineer, and now I'm working in the cloud. So I get both sides. Okay? I want to make sure that I'm being transparent and that there are some considerations when you or your team wants to build in the cloud. Some of the things to keep in mind, some of the pros that come along with it. Okay? It's pretty quick to set up. Now, if you don't have the background of maybe a DevOps engineer, you're like, yeah, right, Michael, get off the stage. But no, we're going to be talking about why I say that, how that has changed in recent years. Other things, we're going to talk about simple pricing, managed services, serverless options, all these things that play a factor into cost, things that you might want to consider when you start building out your applications. Now, over here on the cons side of things, we have a single point of failure, but I have to put an asterisk by there. Because if we're trying to make the assumption that your entire backend should be brought to you and built on one single cloud provider, you might be thinking, well, like, what if that goes down? I have to put an asterisk there because, I mean, it's AWS, so it's like, if your to-do application goes down, cool, but, I mean, so did a third of the world, so I think you're in good hands there. Manual stitching of services, we have, as you just saw in that architecture diagram, a bunch of different services that we have to tie in together. You can't really get away with that, even if you are building on or off a cloud provider. If you pick a SaaS provider to handle authentication or a database, you're still going to have to do that manual stitching. That's just part of application development. But the biggest thing is learning investment. As a front-end developer, typically we're focused on shipping products. We want to go ahead and provide value to our users. We don't want to spend time configuring identity and access policies or making sure that we have every security measure put into place. So there is an investment there. Now, that could come in stride. It doesn't have to go from 0 to 100 real quick. You can go ahead and use services provided by AWS to create some of those for you. But I don't want to get away from the obvious, okay? Things can get out of hand pretty quickly when you start building with services. If I'm being honest, this is actually half of the services offered at AWS. I couldn't even get it all on a screenshot. It's good and bad. At one end of the spectrum, like, how the hell are you supposed to ever learn this stuff? But on the other end, no one actually knows all of this stuff. We offer all of these services based off of various use cases that you might need. So we have machine learning capabilities. We have stuff for the folks that like servers. We have folks for the people that like serverless stuff. But we also have a new category, one that is sort of taking shape, and it's specifically for front-end developers. As I mentioned, AWS didn't really lay its foundation when it came to front-end development, but now we have our own category. And I say we because we're in this front-end ecosystem together, and there's a certain set of tools and services that we're going to be talking about today that help expedite development. So as a front-end developer, we kind of have to do a lot, right? We're expected to make our applications look good, style them, unlike myself, like write tests and have good error handling. Offer a great experience, make sure that they're production ready, low latency, security, all that stuff. And still, now there's this encroaching feeling that maybe we have to learn serverless options, whether that be a serverless function provided by some framework, or something like within Expo and how they are incorporating file-based routing and how that can work itself into things like API routes. Okay? We have all these considerations to make. How does my application look from mobile as it goes to web? It's tough. So to take it from here, I'm going to have Ashish talk about some of the services that AWS has to make our lives a little bit easier.
So I think Michael showed the screenshot of all those AWS services. And even while I was here at the conference the last 2 days, just talking to folks, including the Infinite Red team, I was asking them, so do you all like take on clients where you'll build full stack applications for them, like handling everything, especially for maybe startups and stuff like that, right? And they were like, yeah, we know how to do that, but we really want to focus on the front end. We want to build React Native stuff, so that's not really what we necessarily even enjoy doing. And a bunch of other folks are also like, yeah, I want to stick to the front end. That's what I know, that's what I enjoy. And that's really the idea behind what Amplify is. So it's like a complete solution that lets front-end web and mobile developers build, ship, and host full-stack applications on AWS with the flexibility to leverage that entire breadth of services that we're talking about that keeps growing every year as your use cases evolve, right? So let's talk a little bit more about all the components that comprise in Amplify. So the best way I think to think about this is look at your entire application development lifecycle, right? So you have to set up your backend, connect that backend to your front-end app, and then build some UI, and also probably deploy that application, right? So Amplify offers different solutions that really work well together across all these different phases, and you can choose to use them all together or a la carte as you please. Depends on like whether you already have an AWS backend with some resources and you don't really need to deploy anything new, but you want to have the ease of kind of connecting that stuff into your front-end application easily. So you can go ahead and just use the libraries or UI components. Or let's say like you already have a front-end UI and you're looking to kind of build your application backend with AWS. You can use things like Studio, you can use the CLI for all of that. So I'll just give a quick tour of this stuff. So in the builder backend, we've got Amplify Studio, which is basically a visual interface for you to kind of model your data, build and then deploy your application. And you can even kind of build your UI in there based on what kind of backend schema and stuff you set up. And we also have a CLI toolchain for those who enjoy that kind of developer experience. And then the libraries, that's predominantly where I work. So that's basically SDKs in different languages for iOS, Android, web, React Native, that you can use to very simply integrate with that backend without really knowing much about the services under the hood. And an even easier abstraction on top of that is this thing we have called connected UI components, where you can just kind of drop in these UI components, add your app into them, and then basically in a couple of minutes, you've got login screens or a file uploader all working for you. And lastly, we have Amplify Hosting, which allows you to deploy your web apps, whether they are like static or SSR, easily from GitHub. So let's talk a little bit about the philosophy of our thinking in Amplify. So basically, we want to offer developers the best front-end developer experience, but also give them the flexibility of having a full self-managed backend that they can extend the use cases as their application evolves over time, right? So with traditional backend as a service offering, it's really easy to get started. It's a great developer experience, but you're kind of locked in. So if you need a feature that doesn't exist, it's kind of tough luck, right? So you're going to be kind of stuck, not able to kind of work around that. So at Amplify, this is truly like an abstraction over your existing AWS backend for all the services that we offer. So that allows you to kind of not have to really worry about being locked in. You can kind of progressively expand as you need to.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about Amplify. Amplify is AWS's easiest way for front-end developers to get started with building cloud-native applications. But there's another emerging tool coming around the block. It's called the CDK. Back in the day, when I was first starting with AWS, I had to write these crazy scripts. I had to sort of, whether it was Python code, CloudFormation, a CLI bash script. Like, I'm a front-end developer. I didn't want to do that stuff. Then came along the CDK. It lets me write TypeScript to create my backend services. In this example, this is what it looks like to create a DynamoDB table. So you have 4 lines of code, right? You give the table a name, you can set the billing mode, you can give it the partition key as you would with just about any database. And then on the bottom, we have an example of creating that S3 bucket. So on the top, I'm storing all of my data inside of my application. On the bottom, I'm creating a place where I can create, manage, and unstructured data, pictures, videos, CSVs, etc. All that stuff is staying right inside of there, and 1 line of code lets me create that. I think it's pretty cool. So what services do most apps need? Because you saw that scary screenshot, right? The one with, I guess that was 100 services of our 200 plus. Not every application is going to need all of those. As a matter of fact, typically you need 6, 7, 8 at most. So to break it down, I think every application needs authentication. You need a way for your users to get inside of your app. Now, you might have a very simple use case where you don't need that, but speaking real world, you're going to need one of those mechanisms present. We have a service called AWS Cognito. As you can see here, within, I guess, a typical TypeScript-looking object, you can define exactly what you need. It allows you to get super fine-grained. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You can get very detailed with this, and that's on purpose. You can dive in as deep as you need, or you can remove some of these options and just let some of the defaults kick in. It's up to you. If you want to add in a social identity provider like Google or Facebook or whatever, you can go ahead and configure that as well. When it comes to what this looks like, going back to some of those serverless and managed options, you have things like 50,000 monthly active users, which is crazy to me. The fact that you can get away with that before you ever start having to pay anything, I think it's pretty cool. Super customizable, fully managed. You don't have to manage your users' passwords or hash and salt and all that crazy stuff that I never want to do. Like you see my code. You definitely don't want me touching that. I'm going to use a service like Cognito to go ahead and handle that for me.
All right, so that was more about your backend. And if you want to integrate with Cognito, you could start with like the AWS SDK, but then you need to really understand what the Cognito service is like, and that's a bit more complicated than maybe you want. So you could go ahead and use the Amplify libraries, right? And those are like high-level use case-based APIs, so all you have to think of is like, okay, auth.signin. That's a lot simpler than using the SDK. But even simpler than that are the connected UI components we offer. So as you can see here, you basically just need to get your app screen into the with authenticator higher order component, and that's it. You've got all your login screens set up for you. And the cool thing about this is, since we know everything about your backend, all the screens will be configured based on what you've set up. So that could be with MFA or any kind of verification that you have, username, password, or email, whatever you set up at the time of creating your backend, those screens will be rendered appropriately on the connected UI component. And basically, you just need one line to kind of wrap your app in that, and that's it.
So there's the authentication part. But every application pretty much needs at least two things. You're going to need a database, which is oftentimes connected to an API, and then you need that authentication layer up front. When it comes to creating an API, you saw in the demo before, even though it didn't get to the subscription part, and I'm kind of glad the way that I'm seeing some of these emojis happening. What was happening is that I had real-time functionality going in place. Okay? So I was beholden to the internet being fully consistent that entire time. But what I ended up doing was creating a web application. And then with that web application, I was showing that on screen, just like how we're doing here. And then from my phone, using a mobile app, I was entering questions and having those updated and displayed in real time. Now, using the CDK, I was able to share that backend between my front-end web application and my mobile app, which is pretty cool. But then using something like AWS AppSync, I had real-time subscriptions out of the box. We just give that to you. Anytime you set up an API within AWS using this service, you get both an HTTP endpoint used for your queries and your mutations, but then you also have your subscriptions in place. And we give you a WebSocket endpoint, which a lot of you are taking advantage of right now. If you haven't seen GraphQL before, this is what it looks like, not the tortoises, but the actual schema. So we have queries, right, where you can define what you want to do. You can get a recipe. Say we're building out this recipe app, well, you want to maybe delete them. In addition, you just want to talk about like what a recipe actually is. So you define your scalar types, strings, ints. AWS has custom scalars, so that way things like your email or phone number are automatically have a little bit of error handling around them. But then what's really cool is that because you're using, I guess, assumingly, everything under the AWS umbrella here, we can have a directive, which is AWS Cognito. What this effectively says is have my API automatically tying in with the JWT, that JavaScript web token that was provisioned from a Cognito user. In layman's terms, it means nobody can get to this API unless they're signed in. Giving that to you out of the box takes that much more logic out of your hands and lets the service, AWS, manage all of that for you. Now you can still get pretty fine-grained and you can configure things and have custom authorization scenarios as well. But this is another nicety that we give you by integrating our services together. It kind of goes back to that manually stitching of services. Well, if they're all under the AWS umbrella, then it makes it that much easier and less work on your part. So I think Ashish is actually going to walk us through what it would look like as a front-end developer today. Someone who is maybe starting out a React application, maybe wants to test out Amplify, see how that's working for you. So to do that, I think, again, being beholden to the internet, we're going to see just what it looks like when you create and model your application data within a sandbox environment. So not a real needed to sign up with an AWS account, none of that stuff. But just an environment where you can drag and drop, configure your models and relationships, and get started very quickly. And then if everything works out for you, you feel like that's a good fit for your needs, then you have that. But as live demos go, looks like we're going to have to save that for a little teaser, but that's okay. Because I had that, because I had that in mind in case something did happen. But you know what? When it came to demos and having our code displayed, I think it's okay, because when you saw the use case of real-time data flowing in and out of our application, I mean, I literally just showed you. So we're going to save that from there. I appreciate the check marks and the live subscriptions. But thank you all. My name is Michael Liendo. This is Ashish. And we'll be here to answer any questions that you have throughout the day.
You want to go for it?
Do it.
Okay, so I'll just walk you folks through this really quickly, just to kind of give you an idea about like data modeling in Studio. So Michael was talking all about like AppSync being a managed GraphQL service and all of that. But what if you don't even really know GraphQL or want to get into that stuff? All you know is what you want in your app, right? So you're thinking maybe about like a to-do list app, and of course you want it in React Native. Don't click this one by mistake. So right, okay. So yeah, so you just do that, and then you've got like one of your models based on the to-do schema that you typically have. And you don't know right now that this is anything to do with GraphQL or whatever. Looks pretty much okay. Maybe I want to add something else, like maybe completed as a field, and then that's going to be a Boolean. And I feel like this one should be required, right? All right. So I think this is good, but I'm thinking about, maybe we want some comments and stuff in context of our to-do items as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a comment. Sorry about that. And then I guess we just need a content field. That can be a string. This is Michael's laptop, okay? So it's very difficult to type here. He's not upgraded to the 16-inch, I told him, but yeah. All right, cool. So we've got these two together. Now we want a relationship between these, right? So let's go ahead and add that. So grade model be comment. And then we want one to have many comments so that you can kind of add stuff in context of whatever task you're managing. Go ahead and save that. And now this is all done without you having any AWS account, having to use your credit card, anything like that, which is typically sometimes a blocker for you to just get started learning how to use this stuff, right? And you can test everything here about your data model locally in your application before you deploy anything to the cloud to make sure it's exactly what you want. So go ahead and go to test locally. And you can see here, we basically give you everything you need. You don't need to go to the docs to figure out what to do next. So over here, we have a few commands that help you install the Amplify CLI. This is allowing you to pull your configuration onto your laptop right into your application so that it kind of gets the GraphQL schema and all of that, which we didn't have to go through that at all at this point, right? It's just the models that you're looking for. Go ahead and set up your configuration steps. And we made it even super easy for you to just copy paste that stuff. We know developers like that. So, okay. And then all the things you need to just try this out in your application are right here for you. So you can select whichever model you want and then what you want to do, what are your use cases. So in this case, like you want to create something, so you're going to just have data store.save, It already gives you the different fields that you need to populate in order to save that. Same thing for query. Copy paste is easy. All you have to do is like you pulled it down in your application, copy paste this code. It all runs fine. If you want to change something, go back to the data modeling page, add whatever you need, and then you can go and click the scary button over here to deploy everything, and it should all work. So yeah, I think that's like a run through about what Amplify Studio can give you without you having to worry about what's in the backend for the GraphQL API or that you're using DynamoDB as the data source. Super simple to get started, especially for front-end devs.
Perfect.